Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Ross sent me a note and said, Steve, did you see his crazy story from down south? I had not seen it, so thank you for sending it along, my friend. Headline, fish fries, tent revivals, and an ant on the jury. Inside a $10.5 million Mississippi verdict from LegalNewsline.com. LegalNewsline.com. Daniel Fisher wrote the story out of Jackson, Mississippi. Hyundai Motors just got reversed a $10.5 million verdict that had been entered against them due to a Mississippi car crash after they uncovered a trail of evidence worthy of a John Grisham novel, including a jury consultant who staged tent revivals that drew in potential jurors before the trial, and a chief justice whose clerk overheard an incriminating discussion in a seafood restaurant that indicated there might be jury tampering in the case. Funny thing is, it's a true story. The Mississippi Supreme Court in a March 11th decision ruled that the Coahoma County trial against Hyundai was fatally tainted after the auto manufacturer showed that a man described by one witness as a reverend or a bishop, a man of God of some sort, had lied about being employed by plaintiff lawyers during a trial over a car crash that killed 3 people. Relatives of the victims claimed a Hyundai Excel that crossed a highway center line and crashed head-on into a Lincoln Continental was defective and dangerous. The chief judge wrote, "The facts developed in this record threaten the public's confidence in our system of justice. We find that this case is permeated by actual deception upon the trial court, which led to plaintiffs obtaining a favorable ruling. Such improper acts of misconduct leave an indelible stain on those proceedings." An indelible stain on those proceedings. Jurors returned the verdict in favor of the plaintiff and other relatives after an 11-day trial in 2014. Hyundai immediately moved for a mistrial and later asked the court to investigate the allegations that the man of God who attended the trial daily had been hired by the plaintiff attorney in the case. Now, the trial judge refused that request for an investigation, but the Mississippi Supreme Court reversed that in 2017, ordering the judge to conduct hearings. It was then the second trip to the state high court, which overturned a 2008 plaintiff verdict for $4.5 million on discovery grounds. So this thing has gone all over the place, back and forth, up and down the court system. And the man of God initially denied working for the plaintiff's attorney. But during the investigation, Hyundai uncovered canceled checks and other evidence showing he'd been paid during the trial. If they're paying you and you don't work for them, what are they paying you for? Witnesses, including 6 attorneys, also told the court that the man of God had a close friend whose aunt was on the jury and said he had knowledge of discussions of the jurors. Despite this evidence, the trial judge ruled there was no evidence of jury tampering. Hyundai learned about the man of God after its lawyers spoke with attorneys who described his role in another case in Jackson. One of those attorneys later testified that the man of God told me that the plaintiff's attorney hires him to show up a couple weeks before a trial in an area and preach revivals and get to know the people. The best thing you can do for a plaintiff's attorney is to go preach on the revival circuit shortly before trial. We go around sometimes to communities before these trials begin and set up a tent and have a barbecue or a fish fry. Another lawyer recalled that the man told her they had juries that would come in and women would cover their mouth and say, "That's the preacher that preached at our revival this weekend." And of course, the preacher would be sitting in the gallery. The witness also said the man of God told her he'd recently worked on a case up in Clarksdale where it should have been a $21 million verdict, but it was a $10 million verdict. He told the lawyer there were a lot of uneducated people, including a lady on the jury that couldn't count. They spent 2 days trying to teach her how to count, and that just never worked out, he told the lawyer, allegedly. The plaintiffs in the Clarksdale Hyundai case sought $7 million per accident victim, or $21 million, but the jury only awarded them $3.5 per victim. The man of God reportedly attributed it to jurors deciding that people didn't need to get any richer, which is why they wouldn't give them $21 million. But again, how does he know about all these intimate things that happen in the jury deliberation room? The man also allegedly bragged about a friend whose aunt was on the jury, although when asked about it in a 2015 court hearing, he said he only spoke to him after the trial was over. Over the course of 7 more hearings, that testimony was undercut by witnesses, including a lawyer who said that the man had bragged about having a friend on the jury and a former county sheriff who said that the man of God told him he'd picked a good jury in the case. The former sheriff later refused to sign an affidavit saying plaintiff's lawyers had told him not to. It's not good. As late as 2018, this man of God continued to deny he'd ever worked for the plaintiff's law firm. When confronted with the canceled checks, he then recanted his prior testimony and admitted that he'd been hired to work on numerous lawsuits and had organized community events. By the time that story changed, however, Hyundai was unable to obtain cell phone records and other documents to investigate his communications with the plaintiff lawyers. The friend whose aunt was on the jury declined to describe his relationship with the man of God, answering, "I know him," to every question. How do you know him? I know him. Friend of yours? I know him. A clerk for the Chief Justice later said she overheard the man of God talking about the case at the Bonefish Grill in Madison, Mississippi. The clerk recused herself from the case, but her boss rejected calls by plaintiff lawyers to recuse himself. Since the man of God's lies were already corroborated by numerous witnesses, the judge wrote in a footnote there was no reason to consider his clerk a material witness. Hyundai sought to question jurors about whether this man of God had influenced them, but the trial judge rejected most of these questions, including any discussion of how the jury reached a decision on damages. Only 2 jurors said they recognized the man of God, even though he was in the courtroom throughout the trial, and they all denied outside influence. The aunt of the man's friend said she didn't recognize the man and didn't discuss the trial with her nephew, but she admitted under questioning that her nephew had called her the morning before his deposition, and the trial judge didn't ask her about text messages she exchanged with a nephew around the time he was visited by defense lawyers. Supporting reversal, the majority cited a 1999 decision in which it reversed a verdict where General Motors had hired a mailman as a jury consultant, saying the fact that he delivered jury summonses might have allowed the company to obtain otherwise protected information about the makeup of the jury. In this case, the majority ruled, Hyundai's right to a fair trial was compromised by deception that prevented the company from obtaining records and other evidence to determine whether the jury had been influenced. The judge said, "Our legal system is the envy of the world. We recognize that it is not without blemish or imperfection. While such blemishes or imperfections generally are insufficient to require reversals, glaring wounds caused by an assault on our treasured judicial system and juries are another matter. The rule of law remains our pole star. We must protect our judicial system from such attacks." There actually was a dissent. One judge dissented, saying, "The case does raise concerns of attorney misconduct, but they should be handled by the Mississippi Bar." So there you have it. It appears pretty clear that there were shenanigans happening. And a guy shows up in town preaching fire and brimstone with the old tent revival thing going on, free food, and he's meeting all the people in the community. And somehow he becomes known to members of the jury. And now, granted, his revival stuff happens before the jury's selected. But in a small enough community, it turns out that some people on the jury are people who saw him preaching and giving away free food. He's sitting in the courtroom every day of the trial, and he appears to be sympathetic to the plaintiffs for some odd reason. He's telling friends and so on that he has some kind of pull or sway over that jury, and he seems to know an awful lot about what happens in the jury room in this case and other cases. And so the trial court didn't seem to buy it, but the Supreme Court did. And the scary part is that there's actually a dissenter on the Supreme Court who says, "Oh, there's no problem here. If there's any problem, they should take it up with the bar," meaning that the verdict should still stand, but the plaintiff's attorney maybe should be sanctioned or something. I don't know. And, this is really bad. This is really bad. I'm glad it got straightened out, but this kind of activity is really bad. And it reminded me of a story, and people in Michigan will remember it quite clearly. Around the country, you might remember Flight 255. There was an airplane crash in Michigan out of Detroit Metro Airport, Flight 255 in the 1980s. And an airplane on takeoff failed to clear, I believe it was a building and some light posts at the far end of the field. And as it took off, it clipped these things and it crashed almost immediately onto a major freeway, I-94. And everyone on board passed away except for a baby survived And that was the whole miracle, the whole story to that. And also some people on the ground in cars were severely injured. I believe some people on the ground also died. And it was a horrific accident. And as you can imagine, there's all kinds of confusion at the site. And so emergency personnel come in and they secure the site and they're going through it. The FAA shows up and the police show up. And of course, medical personnel show up. And there's a lot of people who know that they had friends and family on board that airplane who headed to the area in an attempt to find out news of what happened. And so they were sending all of those concerned people to a nearby building. And I think the building was on the premises of Detroit Metro Airport. I could be wrong on that. But the point is that if you showed up and you said, hey, look, I knew somebody on board that flight, a relative or a friend of mine was on that flight, they would say, please go over here. As soon as we have news, we'll let you know. And where these people all were, there was a man walking around dressed as a priest. And he's walking around and he'd go up to people who appeared to be distraught and say, is there anything I can do to help you? What can I do for you? He was not there because he knew anybody on board the plane. And in fact, after he got to know you a little bit, he'd reach in his pocket and pull out a business card and go, I know an attorney who's very, very good at handling these cases. I know that this is probably a difficult time to think of this, but just put this in your pocket and give these people a call later on. And the man was handing out business cards for a law firm. And later on, there were some people who complained and said, it's kind of weird. I was waiting to get news about my loved ones on board that plane. Bad news. And was distraught knowing the news was going to be bad. Everyone suspected it was going to be the worst of the worst news you could get. And a man walks up, but because he's dressed as a priest, what are you going to do? Tell him to get lost? And then after he talks to you in a consoling tone for 5 minutes, pulls out a business card and says, here, call these attorneys, and walks away. And so people, as you can imagine, first thing is said is, okay, go after the attorneys. The attorneys go, we don't know who this guy was. We have no idea who this guy was. And I believe it turned out that the guy was from another country and wasn't a priest. And now, I don't know if they ever got to him or not to find out what he was doing or who put him up to it, if anybody did. But, of course, the allegation is, we don't know, just some guy masquerading as a priest handing out our business cards. Well, we can't stop that. How'd the guy get a stack of your cards? Interesting question. But it was a crazy story. I remember at the time hearing about that because that was before I was an attorney. I was planning to go to law school but had not gone yet. I remember reading that going, wow, that's crazy. That's a crazy story. Flight 255 out of Detroit. So this story, however, is about the case in Mississippi that just had a verdict overturned because of some shenanigans. It's a legal term. Fish fries, tent revivals, and an ant on the jury inside a $10.5 million Mississippi verdict that got overturned. Daniel Fisher wrote it for LegalNewsline.com. And of course, as mentioned previously, Ross sent it to me. Thanks a lot. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Recently, I ate at a real nice family restaurant. Every table had an argument going.